The world saw them grow up behind palace gates. Two boys walking behind their mother's coffin, forever changed. Two princes, torn apart by duty, scandal, and the weight of a crown. But no one knew that Diana had left behind one final message. A wish buried for decades. A truth hidden by silence, locked away by the very man who once broke her heart. Before we dive deeper into this emotional turning point in royal history, take a moment to support the channel. Hit that like button, subscribe for more untold royal stories, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the truth behind the crown. This is one story you'll want to see through to the end. And when King Charles finally opened that letter years after her death, it didn't just change his sons' lives. It shattered them. What was in that envelope? Why did Charles keep it secret for so long? And what made both William and Harry break down in uncontrollable tears the moment they heard it? This isn't a fairy tale. It's the moment the monarchy nearly collapsed from the inside. And it all began with Princess Diana's final wish. There are moments in royal history that bend the future, moments that pierce through titles, traditions, and centuries of protocol, revealing the raw humanity beneath the crown. One such moment unfolded behind the walls of Balmoral Castle, far from the public eye, on a cold, silent morning that would change the course of the monarchy forever. Prince William and Prince Harry had been summoned. The message had come not through royal channels or public schedules, but privately through a sealed letter, handwritten by their father, King Charles III. No reason was stated. No staff were informed. Only this: arrive by sunset, come alone. By the time both brothers reached Balmoral, tension was already in the air. Years of strained relationships, long silences, public spats, and private regrets hung between them like fog. They greeted each other without words. Both knew that something irreversible was coming. Inside the study, King Charles sat alone. Before him lay a leather-bound folder, marked only with the initials DS Diana Spencer. It had been sealed for nearly 26 years, hidden away in a personal vault, untouched since her passing. Its contents had been too painful, too volatile, too sacred to release until now. But the time had come. Not because of ceremony, or duty, or death, but because Charles himself had changed. Since ascending the throne, the weight of legacy had settled on him, not as power, but as penance. He had outlived the woman whose life was most defined by what the royal family denied her. And now, he was about to reveal her final wish, a request made quietly in the last weeks before her death, known only to a few, and buried under decades of silence. As William and Harry stood before their father, King Charles lifted the folder, hesitating. The room seemed to stop breathing. What followed was not a speech, but a reckoning. Charles opened the folder and began to read aloud a letter written in Diana's unmistakable hand, soft and looping. It had been composed just weeks before the Paris crash, during a solitary stay in her private quarters at Kensington Palace. She had suspected that her time was running short. The letter wasn't a legal will. It wasn't a royal document. It was something deeper, a spiritual last testament. She had written not to the crown, but to her sons. And in that letter, she had left one final wish, that the crown no longer come between her children. That love, not legacy, guide their future. And that when the time came, they be allowed to walk away from royal life if it ever meant preserving their bond as brothers. She had asked King Charles directly to uphold this, should he ever ascend the throne. It was a final plea not for justice, but for peace. Not for herself, but for her boys. The moment those words were read aloud, something shattered. The palace walls had held back war, scandal, abdication, but they could not contain this. Prince William, stoic for decades, bowed his head. A tear rolled down his cheek. Prince Harry, raw and weary from the battles he had fought outside the institution, collapsed into a chair. Years of armor broke in an instant. Because this was not about titles, interviews, or tabloids. This was about a mother who had seen what the crown could do. And who had tried, with her final breath, to prevent it from destroying the only thing that truly mattered, her sons' love for each other. And for the first time in decades, the three men in that room were not monarch, heir, and exile. They were a father and his sons. And they were crying. The day stretched into night. No staff were called. No meals were served. The castle stood silent, blanketed in snow and memory. The letter passed from hand to hand. Each word burned into their minds. Diana had known. Somehow, she had known this day would come. And she had left them the only roadmap that mattered. King Charles admitted something else that night, something he had never spoken aloud. In the weeks after Diana's death, amid the public grief and private shame, he had found that letter. He had read it alone, and wept. But he had also hidden it, afraid of what it meant. Afraid that honoring it would unravel the very monarchy he was sworn to protect. So he did nothing. Until now. Now, at the twilight of his life, he was ready. Ready to choose his sons over the institution. Ready to honor the woman he had failed to protect. Ready to break the chain. What followed was not a press release, nor a staged photograph. It was a decision made quietly, as all truly radical changes are. Within weeks, plans were put in motion. William and Harry began meeting privately, away from the palace, away from advisors, away from the noise. They spoke not of roles or responsibilities, but of memories. They remembered Diana as a mother, not as a figure. They revisited the places she had loved, the orphanage in Bosnia, the AIDS ward in London, the red-sanded beach in Australia where she had run barefoot with them as children. These memories were not performative. They were healing. The media, unaware of the secret unfolding behind closed doors, speculated wildly. Rumors swirled about reconciliations, abdications, titles being stripped or returned. None of it mattered. Because what was happening wasn't about the crown. It was about the two boys behind the princes. Then came the moment that stunned the world. On a quiet spring morning, without announcement or fanfare, the gates of Kensington Palace opened. A small group of reporters were summoned, not the usual royal press corps, but those who had been close to Diana during her lifetime. They were led into the palace garden, where two chairs waited side by side. William and Harry appeared together. No uniforms. No medals. Just suits. Just brothers. What followed was the most human moment the monarchy had offered in generations. They spoke, for the first time, of Diana's final letter. They confirmed its contents. They shared that King Charles had honored it. And they announced a joint decision that moving forward, their roles in the monarchy would no longer define their relationship, or be used as weapons to divide them. William would continue his path as heir, but not at the cost of family. Harry would not return to royal duties, but he would return to his brother's life. They were not stepping down or stepping up. They were stepping back toward each other. The world reacted with stunned silence, followed by overwhelming emotion. For years, the public had watched these two men pulled apart by history, duty, and media spin. But now, they stood side by side, not as pawns of the palace, but as the sons of a woman who had refused to let the crown define her. In the weeks that followed, the changes continued. Buckingham Palace announced a formal archive would be created to preserve Diana's writings, speeches, and personal recordings, many of which had never been seen by the public. It would not be curated by the royal institution, but by William and Harry jointly. It would not be presented as history, but as testimony. The archive would be called the Diana Legacy Project. At the heart of it would be her final letter, the one that changed everything. King Charles, in a rare moment of vulnerability, released a statement. It was not royal. It was fatherly. As king, I am bound to the nation. As a father, I am bound to my children. Today, I choose the latter. Diana's final wish will be honored not as a gesture of apology, but as a commitment to peace. Behind the scenes, more changes came quietly. Staff members who had once fueled divisions were dismissed. Communication between the brothers was re-established, this time protected from institutional oversight. A new era began, one not of reform, but of redemption. For William, it meant leading the monarchy with his mother's spirit, not just his father's name. For Harry, it meant building his life freely, but with the door to home no longer closed. And for King Charles, it meant dying one day not just as a monarch, but as a man who tried, at the end, to make things right. In the years that followed, the image of that day at Kensington, two brothers seated in their mother's garden, united by her final words, became iconic. It wasn't framed in gold or printed on currency. It lived in hearts. It reminded the world that behind every royal photo is a story we'll never fully understand. And that sometimes, the most powerful act a crown can make is to step aside. Diana had never lived to see her sons become men. But through her letter, her final wish, she guided them still. And as William and Harry wept in Balmoral that day, they didn't cry for what was lost. They cried for what was finally found. The days that followed Diana's letter being revealed weren't easy for the royal family. Healing didn't happen overnight. Beneath the moment of reconciliation lay years of deep scars, suppressed emotions, and untold truths. The tears William and Harry shed were not only for their mother, but also for themselves, for the boys who had been trapped behind palace walls, expected to carry on as symbols, even when grief was tearing them apart. That night at Balmoral had opened a door that could never be closed. After returning from Scotland, William and Harry began the difficult process of unearthing the past together. For the first time since Diana's death, they sat down to truly talk about her, not as royal figures, but as sons. What they remembered. What they missed. What they regretted. It was not just about honoring her letter, it was about becoming the kind of brothers she had always wanted them to be. They dug into Diana's archives. Not just the public records and charity work, but her journals, her voice recordings, her notes scribbled on scraps of paper. Some were light-hearted, filled with jokes and reminders about birthdays or favorite meals. Others were painfully raw entries filled with sorrow, frustration, and loneliness. But all of them pointed to the same thing: her children were her world, and she feared that the institution around them would one day consume their bond. One entry, dated just 3 days before her final trip to Paris, read, "I watch them laugh together and pray it lasts. The world will try to pit them against each other. The palace will shape them into roles, not people. But I hope, please, I hope they remember they are brothers first, and everything else second." William and Harry read those words aloud to each other in silence. They had come dangerously close to fulfilling her greatest fear. And now, they were determined to reverse that fate. As part of their renewed unity, they began planning the Diana Legacy Project in earnest. Not just a physical archive, but an immersive journey through the life, voice, and truth of the woman who had forever changed the monarchy. The project was to be housed in a new wing at Kensington Palace, entirely separate from the traditional royal exhibits. No crowns, no gowns, just stories, memories, and impact. The decision to make the letter public, Diana's final wish, wasn't made lightly. They knew it would stir controversy. Some inside the palace feared it would be seen as an indictment of the monarchy itself. Others worried it would reignite conspiracy theories and public scrutiny. But William and Harry agreed: the truth, however painful, was the most powerful tribute they could offer. They released the letter during a televised event. No media fanfare, no royal flourish, just the two brothers seated at a simple table, reading their mother's words aloud to the world. And when they finished, the silence across Britain was louder than applause. The press tried to spin it. Pundits debated its implications. But the public, millions who had mourned Diana and watched her sons grow, knew what they were seeing. It was not a stunt. It was not a performance. It was raw, vulnerable truth. And it struck deep. In the days that followed, something shifted in the royal family's relationship with the public. There was a sudden honesty, a sense that for the first time in years, the monarchy wasn't speaking through polished statements, but through pain, through love, and through reckoning. King Charles remained silent for several days after the letter went public. But behind the scenes, he was facing his own reckoning. As the man who had once been Diana's husband, he had lived under the shadow of her legacy for decades. Now, as king, he had to decide how to rule in a world where Diana's voice had returned. He chose humility. In a private meeting with senior advisors, Charles made a decision that shocked even his closest allies: he would issue a formal statement of regret, not as an act of PR, but as a personal apology. It would be the first time in British royal history that a monarch publicly acknowledged fault, not for political reasons, but for personal failure. When the statement was released, it read, Diana was a light the crown could never contain. I failed her. Not only as a husband, but as a member of an institution that struggled to embrace her strength. Her final wish was for unity, peace, and the enduring love of her sons. I pledge, as king and father, to uphold it with all I have left to give. It was the speech Charles had never given. And it resonated far beyond the palace walls. The public, long skeptical of Charles's role in Diana's suffering, responded not with anger, but with a strange sense of closure. For the first time, they saw him not as the cold air, but as a man aging into reflection, carrying the weight of memory, and finally ready to make amends. And it wasn't just words. Charles made structural changes to the royal household. Long-standing staff who had contributed to palace rivalries were dismissed. New protocols were put in place to protect mental health and family autonomy within the royal ranks. The institution began to modernize, not in appearance, but in soul. For William and Harry, the road to healing was still bumpy. Old wounds don't vanish with a single letter. But something fundamental had shifted. They began meeting monthly, sometimes in London, sometimes in California. They started talking not just as brothers, but as men determined to break the generational chain of silence and formality that had shaped their upbringing. Harry even brought his children to the UK for a private visit, away from paparazzi, away from controversy. For the first time, William met his niece and nephew not as the brother from across the ocean, but as family. The cousins played in the same gardens Diana once walked, their laughter echoing through the hedges as if history were trying to rewrite itself. Then, in a quiet act of symbolism, William and Harry made one final decision. Together, they returned to the tunnel in Paris where Diana's life ended. No press. No ceremony. They stood in silence. They laid 2 white roses. And they walked away, together. It was more than a tribute. It was a vow. That their mother's voice, silenced too soon, would now echo through everything they did. If this story moved you, honor Princess Diana's memory by sharing her wish with the world. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a story that reveals the heart behind the headlines. Because sometimes, the truth can heal a royal wound and change history.